Hi everyone. Welcome to Black Trans Futures. It's going to be a discussion between myself and Ebun Sodipo about being Black and trans and looking towards the future. I'd like Ebun to introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we'll talk. So, Ebun, take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Ebun. I'm an artist and a writer. I live in London. I make videos, performances, I write text and things. I make work. I consider the work I make for like people who come in the future, and it's usually about like narrating the process of making myself come into being, and in a way that will be useful for people who come after me. Yeah, I think that's kind of me.
Hi, my name is Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley. I guess, a video game designer and an archivist. I essentially archive Black trans people and put it into an interactive form of art, which plays out depending on the choices you make and the identity that you have. So me and Ebun's kind of interests overlie in terms of like looking at Black transness now and trying to project it onto the past and the future. And so to start off, kind of a heavy start off kind of thing, I wanted to talk about with you what you think Black trans existence means. Like, what does that phrase mean to you?
I guess like it means I feel like it references those people who are aware of their gender in a particular way. I mean, trans is like assigned, depends on how you feel about yourself and the gender that you were assigned at birth and whether you want to stay there or whether you want to move there. I think for Black trans people in particular, I think our existence is like always complicates this idea of gender, always has to imagine or like always has to kind of come up from a place of like a lack of history, a complete lack of history, having to really recreate ways of being for yourself, finding really I feel like as Black trans people, our existence is like we have to find our common, find our sisters, find our community, sustain ourselves. I feel like that's kind of my understanding of that. That's a really tough question.
Yeah,
Black trans existence.
yeah, I put it in because when I made this image and I just thought of Black trans existence, like away from it being said by anyone and just
Mm,
as a whole, it made me think of like a planet. Like it made me think of a place that um, that has had life on it, that has had its
mm,
history of how it even formed. Uh,
yeah,
like a lot of it's like undiscovered and seen as like unknown when we look at it through a telescope. Like that's how I kind of like looked at it.
yeah,
Like there's a wealth of it out there. It's like huge. There's so much of it, yet like at the same moment it doesn't exist until like we see it. Uh,
yeah. Until we go look, I quite like what you said about like it's like unknown or like we can't access it, and I feel like that is like a lot of queer history is like unknown and like well, I would say a lot, but there's like a lot of in Europe. I feel like in the West, where like power lies, there is like some sort of history of queerness, and like access to the archives is easier. And like looking back and seeing what we're doing even now in the present, and I feel like you're totally right in the idea that like Black transness is this incredible expansive thing that we can't even understand the full contours of it because we don't have the way of like the telescope, like you say. I feel like it's really not calibrated in the right way right now to even be able to like get like you can't even zoom in to like find like the details. You can't like make out the whole shape. Like if this was like kind of like planetary metaphor, then you can't even like know what the planet is made of. You can only see the shape of it and like the outline of it, and you can't, like there's so much things that were lost and so many things that happen underground and away from like mainstream or like easily accessible like places where we speak discourse, where we share information about each other and form community. Those things are kind of like smaller, I feel. and we don't. And so I feel like, yeah, and that can be like a good thing, that idea, that the fact that we're unknown in a way, that that we don't have to, that we don't come into like the dominant force as much, because I feel like that can also create like, once people know us, once people like know the shape of this planet, know what makes it, you know, I think it's like asteroid mining and stuff, you know? I feel like that's kind of what's going to happen once people like really learn the contours of Black trans existence. So it's kind of a good thing in a way that we're.
I like that phrase that you just said, relearn the contours, which segues. You know, I love a segue. Onto like, what does transness look like in the future? Because that phrase, relearn the contours, is really interesting. Because to me, that would be that would help build that kind of future. That the idea that someone has contours to like learn and understand and build upon and create their own impacts. Because sometimes it feels like an impact's been made a couple of times, and it gets covered up by the debris that's like spread everywhere. The debris seems to react larger than actually what the and so for me, when I think about what does transness look like in the future and how far ahead is that future, I often think about like where these dents are being made, essentially like where in what countries are holding them, what countries are changing those laws, how those reactions are to the laws that are changed. And that kind of, in my head, forms like an equation that equals like, right, so in this amount of years, when they've finally quieted down about public bathroom changes, for example, we can actually move on to something that's actually of real importance. That's important too, but like, come on, it's like a little tiny thing. And so, yeah, so for me, I kind of wanted to bring this up in terms of like, when you think about Black transness or transness in the future, what does it like bring to you? Like, what do you see when you think about that?
I think for me, I'm like, when I try and think about the future and what we can be like in the future, like on one hand, I'm kind of like, I want it to be something so far out of my vision, so far out of like I feel like I'm only here to like lay down the ground, and I'm not gonna like really build that future. I want the future to be so far ahead from where I am right now, because like as much as like joy and euphoria and community and love are also part of my experience as a Black trans person, so is like trauma, and so is like transphobia. And so that future that I want to imagine, I'm like, I want it to be something that I can't even describe, because it will be free of all these things that kind of like structure our experience of the world, that like, so that the way that we speak to each other, the way that we speak about our bodies, it becomes so, we won't be able to really recognize it, because we're free of like the forces that compel us to speak in particular ways, which is like, I feel like maybe that's like a cop-out answer, but like, I kind of feel like, especially when I think about what it means to be Black and what like a Black future can look like, it would be something where the world has shifted so much that our frames of reference are gone, and like so that we're not tied down by the same things anymore. And like so that's kind of like in one far ahead, like utopic sense, like everything's gonna be really, really radically different, that I can't even describe. Like even talking about my body will like in this way won't make any sense in the future, you know, where everything.
No, go on.
Yeah, where like the gains that we've made have like really cemented into culture and like into the way that we just like, there are so many trans people and so many ways of articulating gender and talking about the body, that it's like, if all these things really became impactful in the culture, like you're saying, moving past the bathroom laws into like what happens in the doctor's room when a baby is born, how like what's going to happen then when we have that discussion of like, how do we raise our children as gendered beings? What kind of conversation will we be having when we're like, when we're sending kids to school, and what they can and can't do, what spaces they can and can't enter? How will that conversation happen? And then as we're talking about, like we talked about the fact that like Black trans existence is unknown, in ways. What happens when the ways that we live our lives, our desires actually become important, and like the future centers around that? I feel like it would be unrecognizable for what we have now. So that's like far ahead in the future, like at the end, but like close. Close. Super, super important. Like, I want like trans kids to be able to access their healthcare. Like, super, super important for me to be able to access their healthcare. Like, obviously informed, but like at the moment in the UK, it's like you need the consent of your parents before I think you're 20, before I think you're 18 or something, which would sound okay, but I think that can pose a lot of problems for people. So like freedom, like I want us to be able to choose the ways that we move through the world, and like choose the healthcare, to have like actual access to these things, to have spaces and communities that we can easily access, that isn't like, that we don't have to be in danger to go and find, to have stories, to have like different understandings like told to us already. And just like, I just want a whole wealth of like trans knowledge. That's what I want. Like, I want transness to, in the future, to look like just people like testing out their bodies, testing out gender, testing out movement, but all in like a safe space, you know, all in like a safe environment with access to things. And so that also means like, it's not just, so that also means like, not just like getting hormones, but like making sure that you've got like mental health treatment if you need it, like making sure that your job isn't incredibly stressful if there's like a job, making sure that like you don't have to worry about what to eat, or like all these kind of things that like really impact everyone's life, and trans people's lives in particular, I feel.
It sounds like, to me, it's like a cult, like what you're talking about is like a something that reacts with care instead of reacts because of tradition.
Yes.
It's like based on like the experience of an individual rather than the experience of someone who wrote that law or wrote that.
Exactly.
Which is something that sounds really nice. I didn't think that far, to be honest. To me, the first thing that comes up is like, I am tired of like talking about Black transness, like Black transness is like a thing that stands in the corner of the room and sneaks up on you. Like, for me, like these definitions that we have are also the limitation, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
A way of us being able to like build those communities is that we need to define ourselves in the current kind of culture we have, you know? And for me, like gender in our bodies is one thing that shouldn't have to be defined, and doesn't need to be boxed in any particular way, and doesn't need to be, oh, I am calling myself this because you need to understand my experience as such. Because to be honest, all of us have such crazily different experiences, regardless of us being Black and trans, that like, to me, it's a separation away from these definitions that we cling so tightly towards, because, you know, we strongly identify with those who say they are trans, and but I say that because when I think about trans people in the past, like the carrot people, I always say the carrot people, but who shed a soul, to me, I'm putting trans on them, and to them, that was just society. That wasn't anything to do with an identity choice for them. That was just like the way they were. They would be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so, yeah, I think we talked good on that. And so, talking about the past, I kind of wanted to talk about, so within both our works, we kind of look at the past as a influence and a place to start in some of our works. And I remember us both like seeing various different like trans people like Mary Jones in the past, and trying to like imagine what their lives would be like and what they did and what wasn't written down. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about what it means and feels like to reimagine the past, like to use the present, things that are happening in the present as I guess, how do I say, starting points to elaborate on a past amount of information that you need to extend. For example, knowing that there was a trans woman in 1836, it was Mary Jones, like how we rewrite that to try and imagine and understand the life she lived and the life we wish she maybe lived. Yeah, I wondered what you thought about that. It's a not very good question, apologies.
No, I think it's a great question. I'm just writing down, because I think what you just said, the life that we wished she lived. I think that's really it, because I think it's like all these figures, like, and you're saying about the carrot people as well, they were just living their life and just doing their thing. And the reason that we go back to them is for a particular reason. We use them, we draw strength from them. And I'm sure like they also, thinking about us in the future, maybe drew strength from us. But we look back because of what they can do for us. And that wishing of her is to imagine, like, I feel like in some parts, like a freedom, the things that we wish to see, the things that we want to feel like the past was, so that I feel like as like Black people and trans people, like history can be quite a violent thing to go to. And I think we're also done with that. We're done with like learning all these painful things. We know it's there, like it's obvious that it's been there. And so like rewriting the past becomes really important, because you're trying to build a new history, to build a new person on. I feel like that's what I mean about making work for people who come from in the future, because what we've had to like deal with and build ourselves with is like either like a lack or just like a knowing that the past was horrible. But actually we're surviving right now. And I think this echoes to what you're saying about being in the present. We're surviving now, we're finding joy now, we're finding community now. And so it's important that we can also imagine that back into the past, to make it more real and more meaningful for ourselves. And then for the people who come after us to also know that this is possible, that this was possible, that this is an area to draw strength from, and not just to kind of be ashamed of, in a way. I feel like, and then in other parts, like having nothing to draw from, I feel for me, it's not been damaging, but made everything so much more confusing. Like knowing who I was, knowing what my feelings meant, or even having things to like compare myself to. And I've been trying to like, and it's been slowly as I'm like thinking about history and like going to the past. I think I'm someone who dwells a lot in the past. That's kind of been a way of me grounding and centering myself. And so I feel like that's kind of, hopefully I'm answering your question. And so I feel like that's kind of part of why looking to the past and thinking about the possibility and imagining these possibilities and writing them makes the present much more bearable, makes the present much more easier to deal with in a way. But I think the important thing is the wishing, is the what it does for us. And it's the work of imagination, the work of like telling a story, of like writing a myth. And I think like a lot of cultures, a lot of people need this. Maybe we can even talk about it in terms of like spirituality. At least that's kind of what it sounds like to me sometimes. Having this need for like a spiritual basis, having this idea of like yourself from, or something to like ground you. I keep saying that word a lot.
It's like, to me, it's like a lineage to like look at and build on, you know, like
exactly.
I often think of the phrase like restarting. I feel like every time there's like trans stuff and a trans conversation, everyone presents it as new. It's like restarting a new computer again and again and again. And finally, we're getting to a time where you can't restart without knowing that another computer was on and was doing things. And we can even talk on this fucking Zoom. It's because someone had laid a groundwork for someone to actually want to listen to us, and for there to be enough of us who actually care about what we want to say, and for us even to be seen as sane in the first place. And so for me, it's this like lineage of like thought that I'm really attracted to in the past and placing it there. Like a lot of the time I think about placing false history. I think about writing false history and placing it in the past based on someone real. Because to be honest, that's what Hollywood does. That's what books do.
Exactly.
Extrapolate on small details of the past. Yet when it comes to a Black trans person or just trans people as a whole, actually, they when we do that, they say like, that's unrealistic, that's not believable.
Right.
And we just need to do the same thing. Like, we just need to extrapolate, building these things on, are they true? It's a bit like Watermelon Woman. In that whole film, she invents someone that doesn't exist. And the whole point of it is that you are supposed to look for someone that doesn't exist. And the point of the film is that so many Black people that should exist that just haven't been archived, that haven't been recorded. And so you're going to have to invent them so that they do exist, and so people do the work of looking for them.
And I think that that's like the history that we know now is already a thing that's like fictional. And I think like I feel like we feel the pressure to be authentic, for it to be real, for it to like have like a real grounding, when actually the history that we have it's all from imaginations of like colonizers and people with power. It's their history that history is a story that's like, and the way that we think about history is a story that's made real by power. And so really, when we're rewriting the past, what we're doing is asserting our power in telling this story, in writing time for ourselves, in writing the trajectory of like what it means to be human and what it means to be alive, as opposed to like just getting what we've been told for the last 600 years, which is the past, a history, but in like fictional. Yeah, you might have like, and I think this is like thinking about archives, and we both work with archives, we both work with real things, but it's the narrative that you structure it in, or like the frame that you embed that object, that historical object, that historical person into, that matters, because everything is like a function of power. Nothing is benign, like we're saying. So we like Hollywood's histories and stuff, those things aren't benign things. They have real power and they affect the world and how people think about themselves and make themselves. And so that's what we're doing. We're making an intervention into that person making story.
And I put this slide, which is an image from one of Ebun's work. What's this work called, Ebun?
This one is called "And the Seas Bring Forth New Lands."
And I really like the frame that you gave me because of the words "and it destroyed" and destroyed it, go figure. And it makes me think about, so for me, that made me think about in the context of this, that when you are looking back on history and rewriting it to fit yourself within it, you destroy something that someone was keeping us in. Like, so for an example, I keep going back to about Mary Jones. The only thing left of her is this poster, which essentially warns people away from her. And my idea of like rewriting her and I'm kind of using her in a new work is to like give her a lineage and a story and a power outside of that poster, so that poster no longer even hold her. So that she can tear that poster up in the stories that she brings, in the fear that she brings to other people in other ways, to the lightness she brings to transness, to the representation that she is. And so that for me, this slide that you gave me was just like giving me all of that. So I just want to a little bit of a pleasant comment towards you.
No.
And I guess it's a good segue. I mean, I love my segues. So we found her, and I wanted to talk about this moment of representation, like when you find representation, that feeling. And I think we talked about this a little bit in terms of when you see yourself, and you see yourself for the first time, or you catch yourself in the mirror in the way that you needed to. And for me, I want to talk about that moment where you see representation, something that talks to you in a way that you didn't think anything would. I wanted to that's a very loose thing, but I kind of just wanted to talk about, I've never talked about that ever in my life. I've never talked about what the feeling of representation does.
Do you want to start? Do you want to go?
Okay, look at you, put it on me. To me, there's a bunch of things. So one of the first things I feel is kind of jealousy. Sometimes I feel like that's me, but not now, that is it. Like, oh my gosh, like this is it. Like I am recognizing something that I didn't know I needed, but I always have needed it. But at the same time, I don't know how to get there. And I don't know anything about the journey that it took to be established in the same way that they are, yet they have so many similar experiences to me. I don't understand that. And another thing that I get is just like kind of like it's like the first time when you're a kid and you like taste something you really like. It's like I need more, you know, I want more. I want to go back. I want different shades. I want different textures. I want different ways. I just want like a whole wealth. It's like I want a whole Skittles pack.
Yeah.
To be like, right. Like,
you're not satisfied with it, with what.
Yeah. And I often think a lot about, so sometimes when we get representation, I'm like, oh, I want the behind the scenes of how this was done, how they got there, this movie. So I get like this like huge feeling of like, oh, I need to discover more. And at the same time, a like real desire to peek behind a curtain.
Mm.
And I guess that's just like, again, that's research more. But yeah, that's kind of what I feel about that moment of representation. It's kind of like a driving force. Like it just drives me. It's a huge motivator for me. What about you?
I really love that, what you're saying, and I like totally understand what you mean by the jealousy as well. And I think segue, minor point. I think like jealousy and like trans jealousy is like a thing like we could talk about for ages. Like I feel like there's so much there, and it's like a good thick thing. But anyways, representation in history. When I talk about this person, this figure, like so much, and I'm making work because of her, and like a lot of different projects have been because of her and like coming from her, and I'm doing like a couple of things with it. But when I found her, Victoria, I was just like, I don't know, it was like elation. I was so happy. And then there was like, maybe it wasn't like being seen, but it was like knowing. There was like a feeling of like an affirmation in a way from reading her story, like you're saying. Like this was like, not that she was me, because I feel like there are lots of differences, but the way in which she became herself was the thing that gave me motivation, that really grounded me, that was like, okay, what you need to do for yourself right now is this. That, like, it gave me an example, it gave me a blueprint, it gave me a path to follow. And I think that's really it for me when I find representation, when I think about history. It's giving me a path, a way of thinking about myself, a way of thinking about the world because of this person and her story. And like you're saying, then we also have to imagine the other aspects of her life as well, like we were saying with Mary Seacole. Mary Seacole. What's her name again? Mary Jones. We have to like think about the community. And so then having to do that then opens up this entire like possibility of transness, of trans people, of other people. And so then it becomes like affirming, just not in the sense of like, this is who I am, but like, this is the world that is there for me. This is the universe that was there, that I can create, that I can imagine in my head. So it's like incredibly fruitful. And there's just like, I think I almost cried when I read about Victoria, and it was just this incredible feeling of like familiarity, maybe.
You want to give us some like background on Victoria so people know who you're talking about?
Sorry, yeah. So Victoria was an enslaved woman in like the late 17th century in Portuguese Brazil, and she was taken from Benin. And when she arrives, I haven't found anything of her prior story before then, but when she arrives in Portuguese Brazil, the person that she's enslaved, that she is sold to, that is her enslaver, tries to give her a name, a Portuguese masculine name, and she says no. She gives herself the name Victoria. And then he tries to make her like wear these clothing, and she's like, no, I'm going to choose this other thing to wear instead. And then she lives in her community. She works as a healer, she works as a sex worker, but she lives in a community with other people and has sustained a life there. And I think that was one of the things for me that was really important. And then the Portuguese Inquisition come and arrest her, and they ask her, are you a woman? And she says, yes. And then they ask her if she's got the private parts of woman, and she says, yes, everyone like me in my homeland does, which for me blew my mind because she refers to like a whole community, a whole land, a whole culture that I don't know anything about. And I don't know if anyone in Benin would know anything about now, but people whose relationship to their body, the way that they spoke about their body, their body map, the ways that an arm was, like what breasts were, that was completely different. And so that for me showed another complete realm of possibility from what I know now and how we describe the body. And for me, it was really incredible, that moment of like, yes, it is possible to rewrite the body in this way. For me, was like, it was strengthening, I think. So yeah, I feel like I've spoken about her a lot, but like, stay tuned for the rest of my work and you'll encounter Victoria in other ways.
And from that, I kind of want to talk about this idea of stretching the smallest detail. I do this all the time. And it's not only just with small amounts of information. Sometimes, like, I appreciate very small things about, like, I don't know, I feel like I have to appreciate everything about Black transness. You know, sometimes I feel like there's small things I have to do. And so, for example, for now, I'm building 2 works. One is, what's it called? It's just right here. What does it say? It says, one is called When Your Eyes Meet Mine, which is based around your eyes, you know that. And another one is called, actually, it's not untitled. Oh no, The Wounds of the Sea, which is all built from your eyes too. There's a theme here. And to me, this idea of like stretching the smallest detail, using something so small, and how far, the deeper you look, the more that is there. Like when I think about your eyes, I think about what it means when you look at me. I think about the moment that you saw me before I saw myself. I think about the moment that from across the room, I know what you're feeling. I think about when you see something from someone else. I think about like the moment you meet a Black trans person on the train and look at them. Like I think about all these interactions that happen with the eye, all the interactions that I've had with your eye and with other people's eyes and with Black people, and the nod and the communication you have through eyes, like communicating at a party that you need to go because someone said something messed up.
Yeah.
There's just so many things with the eye that you can just go into, and I feel there's like a wealth of, like a book of depth. There's like a whole dictionary of depth there, and I feel like maybe I do that because we are used to stretching so much. We're used to stretching the littlest bit of community we have, the littlest bit of love we get, the littlest bit of work we get. You know, we're used to just spreading it with our community because we need to. Because the resources, the engagement, the care we've been given, is about this big, and it needs to cover all of us.
Yes.
And so I kind of wanted to think with you about what this stretching is, like what it is this stretching that we're doing.
Well, I feel like you've answered it in part. Like you're saying, it kind of comes, it's like relates to the way that we have to stretch everything and make everything go a long way. Right. But then it's also like I feel like having this intense need for this information, for this realization, for the thing that we're going to create from this smallest thing. I think that's the thing that really drives us and pushes us to really, like, the smallest thing can mean so much for all of us. Yeah, the smallest things can mean huge things. From like we've talked about, like, sometimes when you look in the mirror at yourself, that can be like an incredible, babe, your screen. Yeah.
We've got a question sheet, so I'm trying to look if there's any questions. Sorry.
Okay. I'm like, I guess you'll see it. Do you want to do the re-sharing screen thing? Okay. What was I saying? Yeah, like the smallest moment can be so life-changing for us. Like the smallest thing can lead to like massive decisions that we make, you know? And so like, we have to, I think that it comes from there. That's kind of part of our experiences, part of the way that we move through the world, because like we're saying, going to the toilet then also becomes this huge thing. So I think that's kind of, it's part of the things that we experience on a daily basis, and it comes through in our choices, in like our artistic choices and our aesthetic choices. And for me, it's like asking questions about the same thing, different questions about the same thing over and over again, to expand it, to give it some richness, to like think about all the other possibilities, all the things that could have ever happened around a moment, to give it more life, to like really enrich it. And I know that for me in my text, that's something I try and do, is like even with the surface of water, I want to then make into like a whole text engaging with this thing, because like this small thing means so much to us. It's like, I think that's kind of part of it. Do you agree?
Yeah, like I feel like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of what we do is showing up big for moments that actually should be small. And what I mean by that is like, you know, when Pose came out, for example, when Pose came out and we were all screaming and shouting like, oh my gosh, the first Black TV show with like 5 Black trans actresses as lead roles, you know? And like to us, it's massive, and it was massive. And at the same time, it should have been done years ago. And at the same time, this happened, I mean, I think maybe it was 4 years ago, maybe. And that's way too late. That's way too late for something like this to happen. That's way too late for people to finally be getting appreciation of something that was way back when. It's way too late for us to be getting this specific kind of appreciation, you know, when the conversation is so much larger, you know, than what Pose could even hold itself. And so for me, I feel like we just blow up. We show our support and scream and shout for these small things because we need more. And we know if we don't do that, we won't get it. By either the people making it, other Black trans people needing that motivation and love and seeing that support, or studios or people investing, like it's all the same. I feel like we make sure our voices are heard because they're often not heard. And so the way that we can, we're going to go all out on this tiniest detail, because if someone sees the passion, they'll recognize there's something there. And
exactly, we create such richness from the smallest things. Like that's also what this means, right? Because we have to, right? As like to survive in terms of like money, but also emotionally and spiritually, we survive. Because the world is like horrible and transphobic and is literally trying to make us not exist at every single possible moment. So we have to seize onto those smallest things and then build a whole existence, a whole thing that is centered around like a small community. And like, I feel like in saying that, I'm just thinking about all the ways that like cis people are also sustained in terms of who they are, sustained all the time by the world, and we don't really get the luxury of that most of the time, I feel. And so I feel like this is also to think about that, like this stretching the smallest detail is because one, we have to, it's important, and like that's just the way that we have to make a life at the end of the day. And it's a great question. I think that's, and I think in terms of like both our practices as well, like we feel like in a lot of my films and videos, I'm really interested, I zoom in, I'm really interested in like getting rid of everything and focusing on particular aspects of a thing, either to like decontextualize it, or it's probably just to like decontextualize and move it into somewhere else and make it something unrecognizable by focusing in on that small detail as opposed to the whole. And the whole image can be a bit more horrible or says lots of different things, but focusing on the small details lets me take control of the narrative of the image, or the narrative of what is there in a way.
And that is a perfect segue to this idea of remastering what is lost. So I have a big distinction in my head between like rewriting and what remastering is. me, the things we're doing now are remastering on traditions that have existed, conversations that were probably well more advanced than we're having, but are just not present anymore. You know, these conversations are no longer here. And so I feel like a lot of what we do and a lot of what other trans people do is like this remastering of like ancient lost technology. You know, this remastering of ancient conversations, these remastering of different ways of societies existing, because we're all used to this dominant society, which is like the capitalist kind of structure we have that the whole world runs by, with two genders and everything. That's the only society we know and can even fathom. And so thinking outside of that makes us remaster all these societies, these groups that existed prior to anything being a monopoly of an individual.
Could you define what you mean by remastering?
Yeah, so for me, what was in the chat? Oh, so for me, remastering is, gosh.
Because you have like, I feel like for me, that would mean like you have like the old score, which is kind of like, and then you remaster it using like new technology, new eyes, and you make it not better, but like fits the conditions of like the present, the kind of aesthetics of the present.
So for me, remastering is like archiving for the current context. And I use the word remastering because I'm not someone that thinks like all the conversations we're having now are new, are brand new and came from nowhere. Like, I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
I believe like these conversations were had, I mean, in a completely different way, in different contexts. And I feel like a lot of what, at least for my practice, is that like I want to remaster conversations I've had in the past, like look at conversation I've had, archive it in a particular way so that the context it fits in now makes sense. And so people can be like, that's what happened in 2020, or, you know, for those years, for those 15 people. And then maybe in 2030, I'll remaster that work. And so I have this strong belief of like looking back on people's works, writings, and conversations, and trying to readdress what was in there, even if it's with the same people or completely different people. I feel like there's a real importance of re-meeting something, just like the way Shakespeare's done 50,000 times a year. I feel like transness needs to be archived in the same way as Shakespeare is. And it's revisited in all the angles it can be, because to me, how you can capture how quickly this conversation changes.
Yeah,
the dynamic.
I think that's like what you said, like re-examined from every possible angle, and to have like the people to do that, the minds, like we're all here, we're doing it like on a every day, because it's individual experiences are also different. So we are kind of doing that. But I quite like that, but I think for transness, to have like, to put it into different configurations of different people, like as much as possible, to give it the place that it deserves, so it's not like flattened, right? So it can actually be as rich as we need it to be, which is like full of everyone, everything, every possible combination. And I really love that you said that. And also, like, from what you're saying, like remastering what was lost, you're saying that like all these conversations that we have are like past, are like they've been had before, but then in a way, to remaster something that was lost, you have to have something of it already. And so remastering what was lost makes me think about sorry, my vision's gone. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm having technical troubles on my end. So remastering what was lost makes me think about then finding those lost things in the things that we say, finding those things that we can't identify, like as, like we have to be able to pay attention to the things that we're saying and doing so that we can actually say that we've encountered something that was lost and that gets come back to us in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I often think about like the feelings I had when I was young, and like being able to revisit those, and like like remaster myself, reassess how I'm looking at myself, rejig all of these things, like reassess what I think beauty is, what attraction is, like if desire, all of these things to do with transness. I feel like I need to revisit them because of how like my upbringing is coded, you know. And I have this like, I don't know, like for me, the word remastering, maybe because I'm a game nerd, just feels like a very great thing that I want to do. Like I really want to like have this idea of like trans people visiting other trans people's works, lives, and then re-putting it into their context. And everyone keeps doing that. So you have like 50 different versions of Hamlet, Chancellor, and
no, stop. Don't make that be translate.
You see all of them and they're all trying to tell the same story. You could get to see the differences of like thought, feelings, and understanding, depending on who makes it.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing we can talk about, the last question, is how do we prepare in the present for our future? Some things while you think.
Sorry?
I'm going to just define some things just to give you. So when I mean the present, I obviously mean now. And when I mean prepare, I mean how do we do things now, right now, here and now, not like speculative, like how do we literally do things? For our is like, for me and you, black trans people, black trans future in as a whole. Like how do we prepare for that and those encounters and those pushbacks we're going to have?
Organize. I think that's probably the most important one. And I mean, to like politically lobby, to make groups, mutual aid groups. I think that's kind of finding ways to sustain ourselves on the ground, to give ourselves the resources that we need to be able to make like fight for longer, to be able to write those stories that we're talking about, to lay the ground and do the groundwork. Fight for education in our schools, I think is really, really important. And build like actual spaces for trans people to be in community with each other. And whether that means like building like spaces, events, or whatever, or like hosting online communities and things like that. But all of these things also have to be done with like a political engagement, with a looking forward to like, how can we like, either this is to sustain us as we fight, or this is to really think through ideas to like fight for. Am I making sense? I think that's kind of part of like preparing. I would say like finding people in your community that can be with you on like an individual basis, like having your sisters, your brothers, your siblings around you, because I feel like without that, in some way, I feel like without that, then we can't really do this alone. We can't like make these stories for the future alone. We need people who are like really thinking about what it means to represent people in the media. Like what's the risks of that? And what's the benefits? And I think like, I know my stuff is all really about like history, knowledge. That's kind of the past. That's really what I'm interested in. So I'm like, I want to see more trans archivists. I want to see more queer archivists. I want to see all these people talking about history, talking about what the world was like before, so that we can actually have this blueprint to build something in the future for. And then, like we're saying, the speculative futures and fictions and things like that. Yeah. Maybe some of that is impractical, but
I feel like for me, it's an investment of like, it's not just money investment, but like, we need to start like investing in actually looking after and speaking on ourselves. I feel like we're in a climate where we want to be written about rather than we want to write about each other. And when we do write about each other, it's for each other, but it's not for each other, if that makes sense. It's like there's not like a trans space, trans space, MySpace, trans space, where like you go get your news written by a trans person, you like go understand what this lobbying thing is that's happening about the public bathrooms for a trans person. You don't get the news I get on like, trans athletes have been banned in this part of the US. Like I never written by a trans person. Like I'm not understanding these moments of history through the lens of those that can actually fully understand the implications of it. I'm only understanding it through the lens of someone who's been paid to write about it. And I feel like when we get that moment of like, we represent ourselves and present each other, I feel like that's where we can start building a future that's separate from this idea that you need to be sustained by this big empire of cis people, like, oh, the cis people like me, so I'm doing well.
Yeah.
This white man is really supporting me, so I'm doing very well. Like, I was invested in, and then I'm doing great, and so I can leave friends, you know? It's like bringing everyone with you as you go somewhere.
Bringing everyone with you and really like creating that universe that trans people make together, right? So then it's like, it's our ideas, it's our way of relating to one another, it's our way of relating to our bodies, our genders, in whatever, all the multiple ways that it is, but we sustain this universe for us to go into. And not just like, not just in the mind, but also like materially, like financially supported in this community. So then, like you're saying, then we don't have to think about and rely on the cis universe, as I like to call it, just like that universe where bodies are a particular way and gender is a particular way and history is a particular way. We don't need to deal with that. So it's like we need to make that universe of references, of symbols, of imaginations. And I think that's kind of what I hear when you're like, who's going to report on this issue? Who's going to describe this like important event in this way? How do we know about its impact? How does it relate to us as a community? And then also, but to even think about all the multiple communities that we're also a part of as well, and how that then informs that kind of universe that we're writing about. So it's like, yeah, the future also is like trans in its multiplicity in all the things that we are as well. And I think that really needs to be there. Otherwise, it will just be like dominant powers and dominant way people's understanding of themselves and their bodies. That's going to be the problem. Where, like we've said multiple times in this conversation, we have so many different ways of relating to our bodies, so many different experiences as trans people, and so like we also need to make space for that.
Are there any closing things you want to say before we end?
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I really came out in this conversation. It's been really good for me to like think things through. And I guess like, if anything for me to end, I would say like, please, everyone listening, write your own histories, just us and whatever, we've always existed. So just write it in whatever way you can, whether it's a voice note or whatever, just build a past for yourself that has you in it for like as well, and for reference for you to be like, I existed before. I know that's something that I find really important for me, what I'm trying to do.
I won't say anything. That's a nice message.
I'm like, write your own story in a way. Just imagine something like, I don't know how far back you want to go. I'm just like, imagine like, what's like 10,000 BC, that film, do you remember? That's like, terrible. There's like
Terrible.
Yeah, the terrible film. But I'm just like, what would a trans person living there have been like? As someone who we would recognize as trans, what would that have been like? Who's gonna write that story? You know? But we can all write the story. So.
What was it? Mario was trans? No.
I mean.
Thank you so much, everyone, coming. Thank you so much, Ebun. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to speak to you, babe.
And take care and have a lovely, lovely day.
You too.
Love you.
Love you too. Bye.